You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast, coming to you from Montecito, California. Just this unincorporated Santa Barbara, if you're wondering what that is. We are out of the crosshairs of the fires going on out here in California. Although I have to tell you, even the sky is starting to get a little orange here. What a strange thing, I got to tell you. Growing up in Minnesota, this was not something we ever thought about. It was fires and all this stuff. But it is what it is. At least it's nice and warm usually, and sunny. Well, listen, with regard to this show today, before we get started, I want to remind you that there is a website called wealthformula.com. Wealthformula.com is the home of this podcast. It's where it sits. You could play it from there if you want. But bigger issue for you is that you should go there and make sure that you take advantage of all the potential resources that website provides you with. Free books, lots of free stuff, free presentations, asset protection, free books from me and from George Newberry. All sorts of stuff. And it's also where you go if you want to sign up for our investor club, our accredited investor club, which I highly encourage you to do if you are if you're an accredited investor. By the way, those definitions have changed a little bit recently. The numbers are the same, but I think I can't remember exactly offhand. You should look it up though. If you do have some financial designations behind your name, basically that counts you as being accredited as well now, regardless of what your financial situation is. So look that up. Maybe we'll talk about that more some other time, but I don't have it handy on me right now. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about the psychology of this whole pandemic thing right now. When you think about it, people are social animals. We're designed to be out there and mingling and with each other and hanging out. We aren't designed to be wearing masks, not touching each other, quarantining. Yet for the last 6 months, that's really been our predicament. And at the same time, during this period of, isolation from one another against our nature, we live in a society, of course, that gives us the opportunity to socialize in other ways vis-a-vis social media, which has proven in the literature, in the medical literature, and the psychiatric literature to increase the likelihood of, loneliness and depression and all that. But it's all we got, right? And then we've increased our collective screen times and subsequent exposure to toxic blue light. I mean, if you've not seen, some of the effects of blue light, I would suggest you look those up as well. I remember watching a documentary on blue light. It's kind of freaky, talking about even anything from depression to cancer, etc. Anyway, right now with the screens and all that, we're exposed to these blue lights, all hours of the night, and it's really, I think, going to take a toll. It's taking a toll on us already, but it's going to continue to have fallout for years to come. The whole scenario, honestly, is a perfect setup for individuals already susceptible to depression or other mental health issues. And, the reality is, in this cohort of ours, our listeners, this is actually going to be something that comes up quite often, because what you find is in high performers and high paid professionals and highly educated individuals, having some level of depression or other mental health infirmities is actually quite common. It's probably what, makes, probably is in part what drives us and makes us great at what we do. But it's really a perfect scenario for people who've already got something underlying to really, get hurt more. And in fact, people who've never even experienced psychological issues now are experiencing it for the first time because of the true, inorganic nature of our current lifestyles. Divorces, domestic violence, suicide rates, they've all dramatically increased across the country and I'm sure the globe. Yet, this kind of fallout from COVID-19 is not really that appreciated, I feel like. You don't really hear about it as much as you hear about the COVID numbers, the COVID deaths, and the positive tests and stuff. And in reality, it's probably affecting quite a bit more people than the actual viral infection itself. But, it's just not been appreciated adequately in the media. It's not been recognized, more importantly, as consideration in the big picture of pandemic era policy, which I think is, incredibly important. The non-medical, non-economic consequences of the pandemic era are real. They've got a huge negative impact on many of our lives. Some people, you actually have reported some very positive stuff too, which we'll get into in this interview as well. But to hear about what's going out in this part of human existence, especially if you're one of those people who I'm describing right now, who feels like, man, I'm feeling kind of blue, and people I know are feeling kind of blue. What's going on there? What's on people's mind? What are people doing? You're definitely going to want to listen to this show today with my friend, Joel Wade, who is a therapist, and he's also a personal coach that actually a number of Wealth Formula listeners have reached out to, and you may consider doing so yourself after this interview. Anyway, when we come back, an interview with Joel Wade. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula podcast, well, he's been on recently, although it seems like a million years ago. His name is Joel Wade. Joel is a PhD. He's a therapist and life coach who has really specialized in this concept of happiness. And if you go back to some of our pre-COVID podcasts, you'll see that. In fact, he is the author of The Virtue of Happiness and Mastering Happiness, and creator of an in-depth online course called A Master's Course in Happiness. He's also a world-class athlete, having won multiple national and world championships in water polo, and the unofficial therapist of the Wealth Formula podcast. Joel, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Buck. Good to be here.
So, I never did ask you about that. So tell me about the water polo. Did you end up like in the national, they were like the Olympics and stuff, or?
I played our college team at UC Santa Barbara, actually.
Huh?
We won the NC2A championships back in 1979.
Oh,
and we were actually the first team ever to do that at UCSB. So
yeah,
we were kind of celebrities there for a bit. And I think there's only been one other team, a soccer team that's won it since.
Yeah, I never really thought. I mean, I live in Santa Barbara. I live in the Montecito area. And we don't usually think of the UCSB as a big sports power, but I guess that was a different time. So, I mean, that's great. So you're still doing, you're still keeping up with it a little bit?
Yeah, and actually a lot of my teammates from that team, we still play together on a master's level, and we usually play in the national championships and the world championships for master's level, and
wow.
And we've done pretty well. We've won a bunch of championships over the years, and
that's great.
And it's really fun to be able to play with friends of over 40 years.
Yeah.
And so it's great fun.
Good for you. Well, listen, I am obviously, since we last talked, this 900-pound gorilla landed on the earth.
Yeah.
And started infecting everybody and created all this craziness in the world that I think some things that have been perhaps underappreciated in the larger health discussion has been how this is affecting mental health. And I'd love for you to, kind of talk about that, since, you're on the front lines in that battle. You know, what are you seeing out there? And obviously, you know, you're getting more clients, the same clients who are now things that are getting worse. Talk about some of the common themes and problems that people are experiencing right now.
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess the most pervasive thing is probably depression, because our mood system's designed to help us survive. And so when we get in a situation where we feel helpless or, you know, stuck and we can't get out of it, our mood system naturally and in a healthy way sort of drops down our energy, gets us to reflect and kind of take stock and think, you know, is this the right path? You know, if you're a grizzly bear and you've been hunting salmon in the river for 4 hours and you haven't caught anything, it's like, maybe I'll go do something else.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, this, you know, especially with the lockdown, but also because it's not something we have a lot of control over, it naturally, I think, drops a lot of our mood systems. Not everybody, but it's common for people's mood systems to go, well, I guess I can't do that. I guess I can't do that either. Maybe I'll rethink these things. So in a very natural, sort of healthy, organismic way, it drops our mood system down. The problem is it's been going on for a long time now. And so it's been months and months. And it takes a while for our mood system to drop us down. And then it takes a while for it to rev us back up again on the other side. So I think that's the most pervasive thing. Is I think a lot of people have a feeling like we're on pause right now around the world.
Right.
And we kind of are. You know,
yeah. You know, I'd like to drill down a little bit on the idea of depression, because, you know, I think it's probably a good idea for us to discuss that a little bit more in the context of, you know, what exactly clinical depression is and how it's different from just feeling blue. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that, you know, obviously my own background as a physician, you know, I view depression, the clinical depression, ultimately as a disease in the same way that, you know, diabetes is a disease. And if it gets bad enough, there are things that you can do about it. So I would think it would be a good idea, I think, just as a sort of public service moment, to give everyone an idea what exactly is clinical depression, and you know, at what point does it seem like, well, maybe you got to see somebody or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of flux right now in terms of diagnoses for mental health issues. And I suspect that 10 years from now, it may be a completely different framework for it. Maybe 20 years, I don't know. These things take time. But when I think of depression, there's severe depression where you're really just stuck and not able to function. And it makes sense to look at that as a disease, but a lot of the more recent research and sort of framing of that and understanding of that, it may not be, you know, it's not the same thing as diabetes, because there are things that are somewhat predictable about what brings us down and what affects our mood system. And just practically speaking, you know, as a clinician and a life coach, that, you know, I'm always looking for, well, here's the situation. How do we make it better? You know, how do we improve it? And what I found is that it's most helpful to think of it as kind of healthy functioning gone wrong, like almost like.
But isn't that disease, Joel?
I'm sorry?
Isn't that disease basically healthy functioning gone wrong?
It's maybe more like an allergy where our systems overreact to something, or there's certain things to watch out for, and if like if I make sure I'm not stung by a bee, as best as I can, then chances are I'll avoid that. Because there are certain things that that make us more susceptible to depression. One is temperament. So if by temperament we tend to be sort of more anxious, more worried about stuff, more sensitive to stuff, it doesn't mean we'll be depressed, but it's easier for us to get depressed than somebody else. If there's certain stressors that happen, and I'll go into that a little more, that can knock us down. And like this COVID thing, that's a stressor, and it changes the external environment in a way that we can feel kind of helpless, and that can lead to lower mood. So there's things that can set us up, and habits, sort of routines that disrupt our natural flow. Like if your sleep if you have to work the graveyard shift, for example, or it changes a lot, so you don't get a regular routine of night sleep, or you don't get physical activity. There are certain habits and routines that can make depression more likely or less likely.
So let me ask you this, though. We've got a lot of people out there who are feeling blue.
Yeah.
At what point am I just feeling blue, and what point is it depression and I should potentially look for some help?
I think with any issue like that, but let's stick with depression, if it's interfering with your functioning. So, I mean, we all have good days and bad days, but most fluctuations in mood last about a day. So if you have a bad day, you're probably going to feel not very good that day, but the next day you're probably actually going to feel a little better than normal. Our mood system bounces us back up unless there's something more chronic happening. So there are things like loss is a big trigger for our mood system to drop us down, because if we lose somebody dear to us, it changes the equation of our lives in a way that we really need to stop and take stock of things.
Do you buy in sort of the DSM-4 criteria, that kind of thing, or you do sort of more Gestalt feeling in the depression side?
I think I find it more useful in my work to think of it as a natural biological process. So, I mean, we have our different systems. We have our sympathetic nervous system that kicks in if we're in danger. And I see our mood system as something that kicks in to make it more likely that we'll survive a situation that we maybe are stuck in. I'll give you an example. For drug companies, when they're looking for a chemical to help that might help depression, there's an experiment they do where they hang mice by their tails in a situation where they can't escape. So they're hanging there and they struggle and they're running and they're trying to swing around and climb their tails or whatever they can do. After a couple of minutes of doing that, they relax and they just kind of give up. And they might kick a little bit, but they just kind of give up because their mood system is seeing there's no way out. And so really the best survival strategy at that point is to just wait and see if things can improve.
We got a lot of mice hanging these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
But some are going to be able to handle that better than others, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in the experiment, after a couple more minutes, they let them go and they're fine. But to see what chemical might be a good antidepressant, they see what can make the mice kick around longer. Well, is that actually helping depression? Because if the mice keep kicking for long enough, they could die from the stress of it. Mm-hmm. So it's not continuing to kick around when there's nothing you can actually do is actually not a very good survival strategy. So a lot of times when we think of somebody that's depressed, we think, oh, they're just not motivated enough. Why don't they get out and do something? What's wrong? when sometimes what's happened is they've persevered with something that they actually don't have, there's no hope of achieving it. So they're striving after a goal that they can't achieve. And it could be a real abstract goal, like, why can't I make world peace happen?
Sure.
And so that kind of helplessness can drop us down.
If you talk about depression, just in general psychiatric illness, we've got a lot of people living together who normally don't spend that much time together. And I'm hearing, a lot about a lot of divorces, a lot of long-time relationships falling apart. Are you seeing that? Is this an accelerator because people are spending too much time together, or maybe having too much time to think, or what do you think that's all about?
Yeah, well, it's, and that's very personal. For some people, it's wonderful because they have longed to have more time together. And for some people, I think a big problem is it disrupts the usual routine that's worked for people. So we all have our habits and our routines, and for the most part, they're functional and they feel good and we like them. Or that's why we do them.
And they can mask things, right? I mean, if you have habits and routines, we can mask a lot of issues.
And we all also find sort of an equilibrium in terms of how close or how distant we are from the people in our lives. I mean, we have friends that we're really close to that we could spend tons of time with, and other friends, it's nice to see them every once in a while, but you don't really want to spend all your time with them. And that whole equilibrium has been disrupted. So like a lot of people are really missing getting together with friends that they, used to spend more time with. And then there's people that are stuck together in the same place that really that's not the equilibrium they established that worked for them. And then there's more conflict, more, arguments. So it's really a big disruption in the equilibrium. And that can make you have to face each other and deal with stuff if you're up for doing that. If you're up for becoming closer with it and understanding one another, and if you have sort of a sense of curiosity and kindness toward each other, that can actually really improve things. But otherwise, it can also make it really difficult too.
You mentioned there's people who are actually thriving maybe during this time as well. Talk a little bit about that. What are you seeing? I mean, anecdotally, like who's actually like seeing this time as, wow, this is awesome. Let's have more pandemic.
I don't know if I've heard anyone thinking it was awesome.
Right.
That might be a little stretch, but there are people that are rolling with it better than others.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I do most of my work from my home office. I've worked with people by phone or Skype or Zoom all over the place. So in ways it hasn't disrupted my work life, though I do also do consulting where I travel, so I haven't been able to do that part. So I guess people where it hasn't disrupted the routine very much, or I think if people are naturally more introverted and they like to stay at home, or they like to stay at home with their mate and just them, it probably feels like this is pretty good life.
Yeah.
Kind of how I wanted it.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, in terms of, this is a really unique time in history.
Yeah.
But, obviously you've been doing this stuff for a while now. Tell me how this kind of trauma is different than, say, the trauma of, 9/11 and how that affects people. What's the difference? I mean, because both are bad and both have but what are the similarities and differences between that kind of trauma and this kind of trauma?
Well, I think something like 9/11 or an accident, something that's an acute thing, it's very it's very disruptive in a very big way all of a sudden. And that can kind of shatter our normal way of being. And so the quickness of it, it's kind of like if you lose somebody all of a sudden that you weren't ready for, it can be different than somebody that's, maybe a loved one that's in their 90s that passed away, and you're kind of ready for it. This, I think, can be traumatic in that it is changing our routines. And so for some people, that will feel like a shattering of their routines. If someone's been fired from their job or their business goes under, I mean, I see all kinds of businesses around town that have closed and closed for good. That shattered somebody's life's work, maybe, or at least work that for a couple of years took them to get to that point. And that's a very acute trauma as well. And with any kind of trauma, the goal is, first of all, you want to be able to kind of reestablish a sense of connection with people. Because part of what happens with us in trauma is we get stuck in sort of our sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, or if it's too acute, we can go into freezing, which is kind of like, when you see animals that are caught by a predator. And there can be echoes of that linger because of our big complex brains that make stories around them. So there's the acute part of the trauma where we want to be able to relax out of our emergency nervous system, just as a shorthand, into our higher brain function and our capacity to connect with other human beings. But longer term, there's also a process of integrating what happened so that you can grow from it. Because there is a something called post-traumatic growth that's been studied a lot more the last several years. And it's not by any stretch that we want to deliberately traumatize ourselves so we'll grow. It's not a technique for good, effective growth.
Yeah.
But when it happens, it's possible to grow from it, to integrate it, to find meaning in what happened, and to find, maybe what do you understand now that you didn't before? And how can that help you move into the future?
As we sort of come out of this, so you see an opportunity for a lot of growth, obviously.
Yeah. And again, not to make I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture of this. This is not a good thing.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, the idea of intermittent fasting. The idea is you fast and your body thinks you're, and it starts getting rid of old worn out cells and then new cells grow. I mean, that's the idea behind intermittent fasting. It's sort of similar to that, a little bit of trauma, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
As we come, so what are some of the, obviously what you have really, what we talked about last time is, is about happiness and the issues revolving around that and fulfillment. And what are some of the things that we can do right now in general to combat the negative aspects of what's going on in our lives and around us? And, trying to, in general, I mean, if there's just like a few tools that you have in mind just for people to give a go, because it sucks.
Yeah, it really does. It really does suck.
Yeah.
That's a good clinical description.
That's my clinical description. That's my medical diagnosis there.
Yeah. Well, I think the best thing we can do with this is look at how can we lean into our future from this, because this is going to pass. I mean, the infection rate's already going down, and the at some point, this is going to run its course. There'll be a vaccine or not. There'll be treatments or not, but it's going to run its course. This isn't how it's going to be forever and always. And so if there's a way you can sort of think about where you want to go as we exit this pandemic, and what you can do now to sort of prepare yourself to lean into that. Because there'll be, I suspect, coming out of this, first of all, I think a lot of us are going to feel very grateful for a lot of things we've taken totally for granted, like seeing a friend and giving them a hug,
Yeah.
or going to a restaurant and sitting down, just things that were regular day-to-day things. We're going to feel so much more gratitude for those as we
Right.
begin to enjoy them. So that can be a tremendous expansive feeling. So looking for those things, but also looking for what do you want to create going forward. Things have shifted. So there's probably going to be a lot more online work. There's probably going to be less, going to the office for a meeting when it's not necessary. Going when it is necessary, but I think there's going to be a lot of shifts that would have otherwise taken a long time. I think this sort of bumped us into some sort of sudden changes that were a long time coming. And so if you can anticipate those kind of things and lean into them and think, what can I do now to prepare myself as things open up? I think that's the best use of this time right now. You can use it as a very creative, sort of introspective time to think, okay, what can I create now? How can I prepare myself now for when it does open up? Most of our emotions are actually future oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like something's painful now. How can I stop this pain from continually happening in the future?
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of it that way, I think leaning in is the way to go.
So Joel, tell us a little bit about your practice. I know a number of people within our network and community are clients of yours. Tell us about how it works, who your typical client is, what kinds of things you work on, because you're not just doing negative psychology, as we would say, like rehabilitative, but also positive psychology. Maybe you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, my focus is whatever the circumstances are of anyone's given life, and it's going to be different for everyone. How can you make the best life out of that? So I'm very much grounded in what's real for you now. You have to have reality be your friend in order to be effective in terms of growing, and so making a good life in part means being happy about your life. And happiness, I don't mean like I'm happy because I got everything I wanted today. But if you're living in a way that you feel happy about how you're living, so you're living with integrity with your values, you're feeling grateful for the things that you have and focusing on what you have and not what you don't have. Thinking how you can be effective and expressing your values in the world positively. That's going to lead to what Aristotle talked about when he used the word eudaimonia, which is sort of success at being human. So that's what I mean by happiness, is really making a life that you can feel happy about and proud of. And that's what my practice is about. And that includes all the rough spots.
Right.
It doesn't mean everything's wonderful all the time, but when you hit a rough spot, how do you manage it well? How do you deal with it in a way you can feel proud of tomorrow?
Right.
And I work with people all around the world, and doing by Skype or Zoom or by phone, and really with lots of different issues. There are limitations in terms of there are certain people that really need in-depth psychotherapy that in-person work is really appropriate to. So there's some limitations with that. I'm not going to make diagnoses and treat people in the same way, which is why I work more as a coach and frame it that way.
Right. And what's remind us the website?
It's drjoelwade.com. So drjoelwade.com. The information's there.
I want to thank you for being on the show again, and hopefully we can get you on once this is over to talk about how the post-COVID party has influenced people's lives.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. And again, going back to this idea that, wealth is holistic. In the Wealth Formula, we cover it all. This show to me is a value, I think, because, again, when I put out these shows, what I try to do is I ask myself the question, is this topic of interest to my listener? And, I have got this sort of avatar, this person who I think sort of describes my typical listener. And I think about it and I say, okay, yeah, this is an interesting topic. This is not an interesting topic. I'll give you an example. Is it interesting to my typical listener to learn about the nuances of a cost segregation analysis? Probably not. Generally we're interested in bigger picture. We're interested in, paradigms and potentially passive investing opportunities, et cetera, stuff like that. But are we interested in things that involve our personal health? Are we involved with things that can better us on a daily basis? Well, yeah, the avatar does listen to those things with great interest. And so for me, this conversation with Joel was definitely something that I feel like we need a little bit more of in this space. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Would love your feedback. This is Buck Joffrey with Wealth Formula Podcast signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.